Your fish is looking at you right now, not at the room, not at the light, at you specifically, and what it sees is more detailed, more calculated, and more emotionally loaded than anything you've been told about fish before. Most people walk up to their tank and assume their fish reacts to movement, to vibration, to the promise of food. But that's not the full picture. Research from the last decade has completely rewritten what we know about fish perception, fish memory, and fish psychology. And what that research shows is genuinely unsettling in the best possible way. Your fish has been building a mental profile of you. It tracks your color patterns, it maps your face, it logs your timing. And depending on how you've been showing up at that tank, it either feels something close to anticipation when it sees you, or something closer to dread. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what your fish sees when you walk into the room, why it responds differently to you than to other people in your home, how its mood shifts based on your behavior, and what you can do starting today to become the presence your fish actually wants to see. You will never look at your tank the same way again. Let's start with the thing that surprised researchers the most. Your fish knows your face. Not your silhouette, not your general shape, your actual face. In a landmark experiment, archerfish, a species not exactly famous for its intellectual reputation, were trained to pick one specific human face out of a set of 44 different images. 44. And they got it right more than 80% of the time. That alone is remarkable. But then the researchers pushed further. They showed the fish the same faces in black and white, stripped of color cues. They altered the head shape. They rotated the images. And the fish still recognized the correct face. What that tells us is that your fish is not just reacting to a vague blob at the glass. It is locking onto specific visual features, the kind of fine-grained pattern recognition we used to assume required a mammalian cortex to perform. Now here's the owner implication that most people miss entirely. Every time you walk up to your tank, your fish is running that same process. It's scanning you. It's comparing what it sees now to what it has seen before. And if you've been showing up consistently, in similar clothing, at similar times, from a similar angle, your fish has already built a detailed internal model of what you look like. You are not a stranger to it. You are a recognized individual. And that recognition carries emotional weight. So when you walk into the room, your fish doesn't just see a person. It sees you. And it has an opinion about what that means. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because recognition is only half the story. The other half is how your fish learns to tell you apart from everyone else. In a series of field experiments conducted in the Mediterranean, wild sea bream were observed over 12 days as they interacted with two different divers. One diver fed them consistently, the other did not. Within those 12 days, the fish learned to follow the feeding diver and ignore the other one. But here is the part that should stop you cold. When both divers wore identical gear, the fish could no longer tell them apart. The moment the distinctive color pattern of the feeding diver's suit was obscured, the fish lost the thread. What this tells us is that your fish is using your visual signature, the colors you wear, the way you move, the angle you approach from, as its primary recognition system. It is building a picture of you the same way a diver builds a picture of a familiar underwater landmark, by assembling consistent visual cues into a reliable pattern. For you as an owner, this has a very practical implication. If you want your fish to recognize you faster and more reliably, wear the same thing at the tank. Not forever. Just during the first week or two of building that recognition. A consistent shirt color, a consistent angle of approach, a consistent movement pattern. You are essentially giving your fish the same visual handle that the feeding diver gave the sea bream. You are becoming a signature that it can learn. And once it learns that signature, something fascinating happens in its brain. It starts to expect you. Not just food, you. Now, before we get to the one that's genuinely going to shock you, I want to mention something real quick. This channel is working toward 1,000 subscribers, and to celebrate when we hit that milestone, I'm doing $100 in Amazon gift card giveaways. One winner, picked randomly from subscribers who comment on the channel. So if you want to be in the running, Subscribe and drop a comment. I'll announce the winner once we hit that number. Okay, back to your fish. What your fish is actually doing when it starts to expect you is something researchers call episodic-like memory, and this is where fish psychology gets genuinely mind-bending. For a long time, the scientific consensus was that fish operate on simple stimulus-response loops. They see food, they move toward it. They see a threat, they flee. But a zebrafish study changed that picture dramatically. In that experiment, zebrafish were shown to remember not just what an object was, but where it was located and which specific context it appeared in. The researchers described it as a primitive form of what, where, which memory. Not a simple habit, not a reflex. A memory that binds together multiple pieces of information into a single recalled event. Think about what that means for your fish. When you walk into the room, your fish is not just triggering a feeding reflex, it is recalling an episode. It is matching your visual signature to a stored memory that includes where you stood, what happened next, and how that event made it feel. Your fish is doing something that looks, from a neurological standpoint, remarkably close to remembering. And the timing matters. Because zebrafish can bind events to context cues. Keeping your visits to the same time window each day, the same lighting conditions, the same sequence of movements, helps your fish tag all of that as one coherent episode. You at the tank in the morning becomes a single retrievable memory, not a series of disconnected moments. This is also why the 3-second memory myth is not just wrong, it is spectacularly wrong. The archerfish study showed recognition accuracy above 80% across multiple sessions. The zebrafish episodic memory work showed multi-dimensional recall, and the sea bream field experiments showed individual human recognition that persisted across 12 days in an open ocean environment. Your fish is not forgetting you the moment you walk away. It is filing you away. So your fish knows your face, it tracks your visual signature, and it stores memories of your visits as episodes. But what about its mood? Because here is something most fish owners have never considered. Your fish's emotional state directly affects how quickly it learns to recognize and trust you. This is the one that's going to stick with you. Researchers studying 3-spined sticklebacks found something remarkable when they tested what's called cognitive bias in fish. In these experiments, fish were trained to associate one cue, say a black card, with a food reward, and another cue, say a white card, with nothing. Then they were shown an ambiguous gray card and observed whether they approached it or avoided it. Fish in a positive emotional state approached the gray card more readily. Fish in a negative or stressed emotional state avoided it. The fish's internal mood was literally changing how it interpreted an uncertain situation. The researchers called this a judgment bias, and it maps almost perfectly onto the concept of optimism and pessimism in human psychology. A fish that has had consistent, positive, predictable experiences is essentially an optimistic fish. It leans toward expecting good things from ambiguous cues. A fish that has had inconsistent or stressful experiences becomes pessimistic. It leans toward expecting nothing, or worse. Now, apply that to your tank. If you have been showing up at random times, sometimes with food, sometimes without, sometimes calm, sometimes rushing and moving erratically, your fish has been building a pessimistic internal model of your presence. You have become an ambiguous cue that it has learned to distrust, and that distrust slows down recognition. It slows down bonding. It makes your fish less likely to come to the glass when you approach. But the reverse is also true. A calm, predictable, consistently rewarding presence pushes your fish's judgment bias toward optimism. You become a cue that it leans toward rather than away from. And once that shift happens, your fish is not just tolerating your presence. It is actively anticipating it. The practical takeaway here is simple but counterintuitive. The fastest way to get your fish to recognize and respond to you is not to interact with it more often. It is to interact with it more consistently. Same time, same approach, same calm energy. Reliability is the language your fish's emotional system understands. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because your emotional state does not just affect your fish's mood over time, it can affect the entire tank in real time. Zebrafish are social animals, and they share emotional states in a way that researchers have described as emotional contagion. In a study published in Science, zebrafish were shown to mirror the fear responses of distressed shoalmates through visual cues alone. When one fish in a group was stressed, the rest of the group shifted their behavior to match, becoming more immobile, more tightly clustered, more defensive. And the researchers identified the biochemical pathway behind this, oxytocin. The same molecule involved in social bonding in mammals was found to be essential for fear contagion in zebrafish. When oxytocin signaling was blocked, the fish no longer copied the group's panic. What this means for you as an owner is both fascinating and slightly humbling. When you approach your tank with tense, jerky, unpredictable movements, you are not just startling one fish. You are potentially triggering a wave of stress that spreads through the entire group. Your anxiety becomes their anxiety. Your calm becomes their calm. You are a social stimulus that your fish are continuously reading and responding to. This also works in your favor. Research on fear contagion in zebrafish found that familiarity between individuals affects how strongly one fish's fearful behavior alters another's. The more familiar a presence is, the less alarming it becomes. So as you build consistency and calm into your tank interactions, you are not just training one fish to recognize you. You are gradually recalibrating the emotional baseline of the entire tank. You are becoming a source of calm rather than a source of alarm. And that is a fundamentally different relationship than most fish owners ever realize they can have with their tank. Now let's talk about something that takes this even further, because it turns out that fish don't just track your appearance and your mood, they track your relationship to them, and they have preferences. Research on convict cichlids, a species that forms monogamous pair bonds, found that females paired with preferred mates showed better reproductive success and more optimistic behavior in judgment bias tests. Females stuck with non-preferred partners showed the opposite. Their behavior in ambiguous cue tests shifted toward pessimism. They checked uncertain locations more slowly. They were less exploratory, less engaged, less emotionally invested in their environment. The researchers interpreted this as evidence that fish mood is tightly linked to social relationships, not just to food or safety, but to who they are with. The quality of a social bond affects the emotional state of the fish in measurable, testable ways. And that emotional state then affects how they interpret everything else in their world. For you as an owner, this is a profound reframe. You are not just a feeder, you are a social presence. And your fish is, in its own way, forming something that functions like a preference for you over other people in your home. That preference is not random. It is built through consistent, positive, predictable interaction. You are, whether you knew it or not, becoming your fish's preferred individual. And here is the evidence that this preference is real and durable. Damselfish and other species have been shown to retain visual memories of familiar individuals and change their behavior based on that memory. They treat known individuals differently from strangers, not just in terms of fear, but in terms of engagement, approach, and social investment. Your fish is not treating you as a generic human. It is treating you as a specific individual with a history. So when you walk into the room, your fish sees your face, recognizes your visual signature, recalls the episode of your last visit, checks its internal mood to decide how optimistic it should be about this interaction, reads your body language for emotional contagion cues, and then responds based on the accumulated social history it has built with you. All of that happens in the seconds between you entering the room and reaching the glass. That is not a reflex. That is psychology. One last thing before you go. As I mentioned earlier, this channel is working toward 1,000 subscribers, and I'm running $100 in Amazon gift card giveaways to celebrate when we hit that milestone. Everyone who's subscribed and left a comment is automatically in the running, no extra step needed. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe, drop your take in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode. Here is what all of this adds up to. Your fish knows your face with over 80% accuracy. It uses your visual signature, your colors, your movement patterns, your angle of approach to recognize you as an individual. It stores memories of your visits as multidimensional episodes that it can recall and compare. Its emotional state, whether optimistic or pessimistic, determines how quickly it bonds with you and how eagerly it responds to you. Your body language and emotional energy spread through the tank in real time through a mechanism involving the same oxytocin pathways found in mammals. And it has formed something that functions like a genuine social preference for you, built through the history of your interactions. You are not just keeping a fish. You are sharing a space with a creature that is actively building a psychological model of you. It is watching you. It is remembering you. It is feeling things in response to you. And the question is not whether your fish has an inner life. The science has already answered that. The question is what kind of presence you are choosing to be in it. If this changed how you think about your tank, there is a video on this channel that goes even deeper into what your fish is feeling on a daily basis and what you might be doing without realizing it that affects its emotional world. It is worth your time. I'll see you there.